I probably just used the old.
That might be.
No, it's still there. I have to go back and look. Yeah, I probably left the old number from the uncorrected gas in there. So it looks like.
Perfect. Well, I think we're safe to get started, if that's okay with everybody. We're up and we're recording and everything. So it's June 15th today. It's beautiful outside, and we've got Lynn Helms here. So he's going to give us the April production numbers and update.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for coming to the webinar, logging into the webinar. Thanks for coming to the press conference. Appreciate that. So we're talking April 2018 numbers, and we might as well start off right away with the big surprise, and that is that we came within 2,500 barrels a day of the record in terms of production. So 63,000 barrel a day increase March to April oil production. We were not expecting that kind of a surge until late May, early June. So we'll see what happens with the May production. Again, it's a little bit of caution there. We still had road restrictions on in May, and we have a major force majeure event with the gas plant at Robinson Lake being down, and we don't know yet what operators may have done in terms of shutting in production or curtailing production in order to limit flaring because of that plant shutdown. So may not break the record, but clearly now that that plant is back up and June is up and running, we expect to break that record before mid-year. So pretty exciting to get within 2,500 barrels a day. That's over a 5% increase in oil production. The interesting thing is, along with that, we had more than a 7% increase in gas production. So gas continues to outpace oil, and that creates one of our big challenges in terms of what industry is going to do going forward. How do they continue to increase production in the face of 2 or 3 pretty significant challenges? One of those being the new play that's kind of hitting the press these days. I was just reading about it this morning. Companies, in particular 3 North Dakota companies, are going into the Austin Chalk in a big way. Austin Chalk is a chalk formation that overlies the Eagle Ford Shale. It extends across Texas and Louisiana. It's a 650-mile long play in a chalk formation. In Texas and Louisiana, the USGS has said there's some 4 billion barrels technically recoverable there. EOG, ConocoPhillips, and Marathon have all announced in the last month or 2 that they've bought a bunch of acreage in the Austin Chalk, and they're ready to take the new horizontal drilling hydraulic fracturing technology to the Austin Chalk. It was really hot back in the 1990s, but because of how variable the well performance was, companies walked away from it, and now they're going back. So we're going to have to compete with not just Permian, Eagle Ford, and Anadarko, but another new play. And that competition is going to take 2 forms. One is capital. So those 3 companies constitute pretty major investors in the Bakken. I think we need to focus on the fact that both ConocoPhillips and Marathon were here, and at the Williston Basin Conference, both of them said they're still going to put $1 billion into North Dakota capital in 2018 and targeting $1.2 billion in 2019. So even with this Austin Chalk play, they're planning significant investments here, but there is new competition for capital. The other area where it creates competition is workforce, and that seems to be a major limiting factor. We're at 62 drilling rigs. That matches up with 35 or 36 frac crews that we have working, and those 2 have to move in sync with each other. So until qualified, talented workforce shows up and starts coming to the job fairs, we're going to be restricted in how quickly activity and production can grow. So when you kind of put those three things together, we've got the new play that we're competing with, we've got the capital and workforce competition, and then we got the rise in gas production coming up faster than oil, and the need to meet gas capture. It's going to be a major effort to increase oil production very rapidly. When we turn to the non-completed wells, that's up 942. Talking to industry at the conference again, their conclusion is that there's only 100 to 110 of those that are true drilled uncompleted wells, that companies have made a conscious decision to leave that well not completed. That means that the new normal is 800 or 850 wells in inventory at all times. Now, if suddenly it was possible to get hydraulic fracturing equipment and crews, that new normal inventory would come down. But it looks like we're going to maintain an inventory, a large number of wells that are drilled but not completed. They're not being purposely delayed. They're just being delayed by timing to get a frac crew, gas capture plans, and all of those efforts to bring them on when they fit into the system. So I'm hearing that the new normal is going to be a large number of drilled but not completed wells going forward in North Dakota. Interesting, the change in activity on the reservation. 5 less rigs, but out of the 63,000 barrels a day increase, 27,000 was on the reservation. So almost half of the entire state's production increase was new completions on Fort Berthold. That's pretty exciting until you see what happened to the gas capture numbers, and that just drove them right down, through the goals and targets to well below those. And you also see the inventory of non-completed wells on Fort Berthold go up by 13. So it's up more than 10%. It's up almost 15%. So companies are putting wells in inventory rather than completing them based on when they can get frac crews and what they can do with the gas. Just talking about gas capture, statewide Bakken barely made it by 0.06%. It was 85.06% gas capture in the Bakken. It was a little bit less than 85%, all gas, all in, 84.6, I think, something like that. Where the problems arose were particularly on trust lands and on Fort Berthold. Right-of-way delays, again, we have force majeure letters, so we can document this, that there were right-of-way delays for One Oak and Targa and Crestwood, Arrow, that amounted to more than 20 million cubic feet a day in force majeure letters. There was also a major compressor outage on the One Oak system. That resulted in about 23 million cubic feet a day going to flare. Some of it directly from that compressor, and some of it because gas shifted off that system to other pipes and crowded Fort Berthold gas off. So it all ended up kind of rippling back into the Fort Berthold gathering system and resulted in gas capture on the trust lands on Fort Berthold to be only 76%. So that is going to be an ongoing struggle. Everybody's very focused on it. The tribe is very focused on it and is working hard to get right-of-ways approved. The BIA is focused on it and is looking for solutions to streamline their process. And hopefully we'll come out of this year in a lot better shape. But this is what we've been talking about for a couple of months was coming. As we started to bring production up and break those oil production records, we are going to really have to work hard on gas capture. And it's going to be very hard to control it across the board. So we're in the process now of auditing all that to figure out which companies and where did they not meet the gas capture requirements, and what's the result of that going to be. So stay tuned or talk to Dave Tabor in the production department about that. along those lines, Mr. Tabor is going to be moving into our field supervisor position, and he's going to be replaced by a young lady coming in from Williston, Caitlin Simpkins. So starting June 21st, we'll have a new person sitting in that chair and a new person for you to talk to about gas capture and oil production. So exciting and great opportunities for those young folks to move up in the agency. So we'll continue along those lines. Last two things I wanted to talk about. Nothing really happening on the federal rules standpoint, but two very positive movements out of the Bureau of Land Management. On the 6th of June, they issued what's called an information bulletin. And even though it doesn't totally get us to where we want to be on in terms of NEPA processes and that sort of thing, a big move in a positive direction, giving the state offices the confidence they have to implement categorical exclusions and to reduce some of the redundant NEPA analysis that's been going on drilling permits and rights of way and projects like that. And then just 6 days later, on June 12th, they published a permanent instruction memo dealing with fee federal, and that's on page 3 of my director's cut. So again, another big positive step in terms of giving the state and district offices for the BLM guidance on how to streamline NEPA, how to get permits approved faster, and not do repetitive, redundant NEPA where it's unnecessary. We particularly want to support the concept behind the instruction memo from the standpoint that one of the big duplicative things in NEPA is if you drill a horizontal well into federal minerals, but the surface location is on private land, they're still considering that a significant federal, what's it called? A significant federal action and requiring NEPA analysis and all of that, even though it's on private land. And so they're looking at, there's legislation and rulemaking under consideration to straighten that out. But two very big positive steps by the Bureau of Land Management. And I'm sure that's because Secretary Zinke's been out here and been to North Dakota numerous times, and Governor Burgum is very much engaged, along with the Governor of New Mexico, in working with the Secretary and his office on streamlining some of these things. So we really appreciate what he's doing and him coming to North Dakota to look at it on the ground. So really exciting month, and really close to record oil production, new record gas production, and along with that comes some of the challenges. We'll take some questions.
Do you have any reasons that you attribute the significant increase for April, or any ideas why it went up so high?
Yeah, it was new well completions. Thank you. The question was, what do we attribute the production increase in April to? And it was new well completions. They greatly exceeded our expectations, and particularly on Fort Berthold, where almost half of the production increase occurred on Fort Berthold. And we were sort of anticipating that, because last month we saw that major increase in rig count on Fort Berthold. We thought it was going to come later rather than sooner. So they went ahead and completed those wells, but now they've moved those rigs off the reservation, and they're out working in Divide and Williams and Burke and Dunn County. So, but it was well completions, new wells dominantly, and that also is what, in addition to the force majeure situations, what drove the flaring numbers down. Well, the volume's up and the capture down. So.
I'll
Anything?
take a couple questions from on here. Can you speak a little bit more about conversations with Secretary Zinke while he was here for the Williston Basin Conference? Any updates there, progress or conversations, anything with right-of-way or flaring issues?
Okay, yeah. So Secretary Zinke was here. One of the very few secretaries to come to North Dakota. I think, if I captured it correctly, it had been 50 years or more since a Secretary of the Interior came to North Dakota. And he, in fact, went down to Standing Rock. And if I understand it correctly, he is the first Secretary of the Interior to even visit that reservation. So very remarkable and a landmark decision on his part to come and spend 4 days with us. So we had a lot of conversations. He's very committed to the work that we're doing here, very, very committed to working with the BIA to streamline that right-of-way process. He's got his folks focused on that. Do we need more manpower in Newtown? Do we need to do something about the paperwork traveling back and forth between Denver and Newtown? And how can we revise that process to streamline it? How can we maybe look at right-of-ways and old right-of-way agreements, but also give industry guidance on how to write new right-of-ways so that the flexibility is there to increase gathering system capacity without having to go back. You know, just it'll make sense to you when I tell you that if you have to go back and get a new right-of-way, you have to get 51% of the allottees that own that 320-acre tract of land to agree to that right-of-way. And that is an enormous time-consuming thing to track down 51% of the living allottees and get their approval. So the understanding of how to write a right-of-way agreement so it has flexibility in it for line looping and increased capacity is going to be critical. So he really grasped what the issues are. He didn't just talk to us, but he talked to the BIA folks and really seemed to quickly grasp what the issues are and where to put some resources to solve those problems.
Got another one I'll add just to follow up from that. In your comments, you do have that operator plans are to add 5 to 10 rigs in the next second and third quarters. What would a picture of 5 to 10 more rigs look like, specifically on the 10 rig
Mm-hmm.
side?
Yeah, so if we're looking at 10 additional rigs, that puts us at between 70 and 75 drilling rigs. That's really the equivalent of what we had for a rig count when we were at cruising altitude. You know, prior to the downturn, when we had roughly 180 drilling rigs in the state, and they were working at the efficiency of the 2013, 2014 rig efficiency. So if we get to 75 drilling rigs, that's easily the equivalent of 150 drilling rigs 4 years ago. That means production is growing rapidly, well counts are growing rather quickly, and it'll be an enormous challenge to get the infrastructure in the ground to capture 88% of the gas. It also means that we're going to have to add, you know, if we add 10 drilling rigs, we have to add 6 frac crews. And so the amount of hiring that goes along with that, you're talking 1,200 people to work on the rigs and another 400 or 500 to man the frac crews. And so it's going to put pressure on housing. It's going to put pressure on infrastructure. All of those are positive things because that means the Western cities go back into growth mode. We'll have to attract some investment to build multifamily housing and single family housing out there. But those are things that North Dakota now is used to and has learned how to deal with them and is looking forward to those challenges. But you're talking a couple thousand employees, a couple thousand new jobs, along with the family members and everybody that comes with that, adding to our need for housing and infrastructure and all of that in Western North Dakota. So a big positive. It means month on month, 5% production increases.
Can you speak a little bit about the differential that's happening right now? And just wondering, is it a regional takeaway issue or a function of oversupply of U.S. light sweet?
So I'm going to leave most of that for Justin because he's got the charts and maps to show that. I'll just speak very briefly to, you know, at the Wilson Basin Conference just a couple of weeks ago, most of the companies who are very good and very active at marketing their crude oil talked about the fact that through Dakota Access Pipeline and access to the Gulf of Mexico, they're able to market pure Bakken crude at or maybe at a slight premium to West Texas Intermediate. That's enormous when you look at what's happening in Midland, Texas, where they're now selling crude oil at anywhere from a $9 to $19 discount to West Texas Intermediate. So the excitement around Midland, Texas and the Permian is being dampened significantly by those kind of price differentials. The other factor that we're having, and Justin can give you the more specific numbers, is the WTI to Brent differential is driving crude oil off the pipeline and into rail cars in order to serve the East Coast, West Coast markets. So we're seeing a fairly rapid increase in rail utilization, which puts emphasis on our oil conditioning rules. And you know, we're going to be talking with Department of Energy and folks about that. But it's very important that we stay focused on that as we move oil off the pipelines and back into rail cars. So price differentials have actually flip-flopped from where they were maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago to where the big discount was in North Dakota and the little discount was in West Texas. It's just the opposite. We're mostly marketing our crude oil at a premium to WTI, and they're marketing at a steep discount.
Any other questions in the room?
At this point, do you know if any companies will face any production restrictions because of the flaring?
That work is ongoing. You know, I was just visiting with Mr. Tabor before I came in the room, and he hadn't finished that analysis. So too early to say. I would be surprised at these numbers if there weren't some production restrictions. And we'll just have to see. That's kind of why I threw that caution out there about May, is the companies knew that the Robinson Lake plant was going down. They knew that that was going to be a major challenge and might result in production restrictions. So I'm expecting that they factored that in and self-restricted. But I'd be surprised at these numbers if we don't see some production restrictions. But I don't know who or how much at this point.
Will the new policy apply, or the revised policy apply to that production?
Yes, it will. It was passed. Let's see, when did the commission pass that? Boy, you're asking me. You've really used my memory. But it is going to be applied to April production.
Okay.
Yes, that much I can say. Time for Justin?
I've got one more question I'm gonna
Okay.
hit you with. So we are 6 months away from the legislature being back in session. So just kind of maybe if you want to speak towards what that session might bring, any discussion, anything related towards budget as well, kind of as folks are going to start looking towards hopefully seeing an increase in oil and gas.
So speaking to what the next legislative session, how this might shape it, it's clearly going to provide a little touch of optimism. The budget forecast or the revenue forecast, we'll be starting on that next month with our first revenue forecasting phone call followed by a meeting. But the revenue has been coming in pretty much right at forecast, meaning that the budget in terms of expenditures was going to have to be cut again. I think what these numbers do for us is they begin to refill the savings accounts. So the general fund has already gotten its first $300 million, and money is now spilling over into the follow-up buckets. And so there will be a bucket very soon that will add more money back into the general fund and the ending fund balance. And it looks like, based on these numbers, that will fill, and then the Strategic Investment and Infrastructure Fund will start to receive money. So I guess the good news is that some of the savings accounts that were called upon to balance the budget this biennium are going to have money in them again. Just a few months ago, the anticipation was that they were going to be empty and there would have to be significant cuts to adjust to cash flow and income. But this is going to rebuild some of those savings accounts. So there'll be a lot more flexibility for legislators. Is it going to open the door to a bunch more spending? No, no, I don't. It's not that good yet. And you can see from the revenues that comes in that sales tax is still just at or slightly below revenue projections, and that's the big general fund feed. But at least there's going to be some flexibility there for legislators to look at some needs because some of those savings accounts will now have a positive balance.
Perfect. Thank you. We will switch
Thanks.
over to Justin Kringstad with Pipeline Authority.
Grab that HDMI cable from you, please. Thank you. No, I don't think so.
Memorized?
Yeah. Something like that. Okay, are you ready on your end?
I am. Go right ahead.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We'll get right into some production information from the surrounding areas. Again, still seeing slight downward movements in oil production from eastern Montana, South Dakota. Eastern Montana does have one drilling rig operating according to Baker Hughes, and South Dakota remains at the 0 active drilling rigs in the region. This was just a chart backing up some of Lynn's numbers that he was just providing. Again, just for some context about, if you look at the very right-hand side of this graphic, again, that's our month-over-month changes. And you can see, again, both crude oil and natural gas at substantial change in what we've been trending the last several months. And so, again, somewhat surprising to most of us in the industry that, expecting some type of increase, but nowhere near the level that the numbers came out to. When we look at April transportation, comparing it March to April, not a lot of change percentage-wise. Again, we're working with a larger base set of crude oil in the region, in the system having to be moved. So all the numbers trended up on a volume basis, but percentage-wise, not a lot of change taking place. Slide 5 is that graphic, again, showing some of those historic trends. One thing that I will comment on here in just a moment is what this may look like in the near term or the next couple months, when we start to see the May numbers, the June numbers come out. And that's going to be primarily on that pipeline versus rail utilization out of the region. Again, a couple solid months, March to April, being consistent. But it's this trend on slide 6 that's making me believe that we're going to see some shifts in that going forward. What you're looking at on this graphic is that Brent WTI price spread. And so, again, taking a look at that world oil price versus the mid-continent Cushing, Oklahoma oil price. And you'll notice starting earlier this year, around the March-April timeframe, that movement going up. And so we were seeing that spread here just recently, hovering right around that $10 differential. And when we look back historically, and I'll just flip back to slide 5, when we have seen movements in the pipe versus rail out of the region for those shippers and marketers making those decisions, it typically is around that $5 to $6 range that shippers, at least historically, have made some shifts. If there's barrels that are not committed to a pipeline system and that have flexibility to move on an alternate transportation mode, that seems to be kind of a threshold number to use. And so with prices, or that spread now hovering around $9, $10, that's definitely above what I believe would be a threshold for those decisions to be made. So when we do start to see the May numbers and June numbers coming here in the next several months, I would expect to see more volume moving out by rail. Again, those are barrels that are typically not committed to one of the other pipeline networks. When we look at slide 7, that's just up through April. Again, we don't have anything beyond April, but even with some of those smaller trends upward in the Brent WTI spread, we have seen crude by rail utilization creeping upwards. The destination, this is even a further backward look. This is from the EIA, taking a look at March information. Again, primarily barrels heading out to the west coast or the PAD 5 region out of North Dakota. and then followed up by Pad 1 or the East Coast refineries. And so I would expect those will continue to be the dominant markets here for the foreseeable future. When we look at what refineries are paying around the country in March, again, the East and West Coast are the highest priced markets. And so those type of market scenarios are situations that, incentivize from an economic perspective shippers to utilize a traditionally more expensive transportation mode, being rail, in order to take advantage of some of these pricing scenarios. And where we sit as of this morning, again, just about a $9 spread between Brent WTI, and then also a pretty substantial spread between LLS, Light Louisiana Sweet down in the Gulf, versus WTI at Cushing. And so again, those barrels that are able to get out of North Dakota on Dakota access, get down to the Gulf Coast and bypass some of that congestion in the Cushing area, again, they are able to take advantage of that price spread. And so when we look at the various pricing dynamics, North Dakota versus WTI or North Dakota versus Brent, again, getting it to the coasts, whether it's east and west by rail or to the Gulf on Dakota access, is the most attractive option right now for shippers. And then some additional movements on that truck traffic north and south of the border. And so taking a look at substantial decrease in the amount of exports. And so barrels were staying within the U.S. system, and we're still seeing historically high levels of imports. So barrels coming into North Dakota and not as many barrels going north. And so again, some interesting dynamics in how those barrels are being marketed around the region. Now switching gears to natural gas. We did see the percentages increase in both segments of natural gas flaring, both from wells connected to pipeline systems and wells not connected to pipeline systems. And so it was a universal challenge across the gathering and processing network. I'm just going to bump forward to slide 14. This is an area that I think we'll definitely keep an eye on. What you're looking at is in red is new producing or new gas producing wells in the state. And then in black is new wells selling gas, or new wells getting connected to a gas gathering system. And so over the last several years, those numbers have typically trended hand in hand. And so the last couple months, March and April, we have seen the amount of new wells producing gas outpacing new wells selling gas, which is something to definitely keep an eye on. And hopefully it is a short-term situation that the gas gathering industry could catch up. It would be very challenging if we continue to see trends where the operating and the producing community is drilling wells and completing them faster than the gathering systems can connect into the network. And so this is something we'll definitely keep a close eye on, and it does help provide a little bit of additional color as to some of the flaring numbers and some of the challenges that we're seeing in the region. And last but not least, just an update on gas processing capability. Because of this large increase, it's now apparent we're in a situation of gas production exceeding our processing plant capacity in the region. And so it's not until later this year when the first of a number of gas processing expansions take place that, again, as Lynn very clearly stated, gas capture is going to be a very challenging situation going forward for the industry. And making sure that they can get all that gas gathered and put into a system and placed into a plant that has capacity is a significant challenge here, especially over the next 6 months or so. And then slide 16, this was just a longer term view, but I think the most pressing issue is more on the immediate side, taking a look at the next 6 months and how that plays out in the industry. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Anything in the room first?
I just want to clarify, so have we now exceeded the gas processing capacity?
Correct. Production has exceeded. Correct. So the question was, officially has production exceeded gas processing capacity? And yes, it has. Processing plant capacity is in peach on this graphic on slide 15. And then right where that red and gray lines start to fork or diverge from each other, that's where April production sits. So you can see that above that peach colored processing capacity.
I have a few questions related specifically to steel tariffs. Are there concerns about build out of gas infrastructure related to that in the future?
On the natural gas gathering and processing, I have not heard material prices be a barrier for the industry. I think that, again, that infrastructure is necessary in order to keep the economic engine, which is the oil, flowing. And so they're going to continue to get those systems built out as required.
Perfect. And then just related to the shift or looking forward towards rail, how long do we expect the positive WTI Brent spread to last? How big could it get? Any anticipation for how much oil could shift over to rail transport?
Yeah, those are great questions. Unfortunately, I don't have any great answers for you. You know, the market works. You know, the biggest challenge right now is that Cushing, Oklahoma marketplace getting congested. There's Permian crude that traditionally would go directly to the Gulf Coast refineries that have now, because of congestion on pipes to the Gulf, are now sending crude north into Cushing, and as well as rising production from the Rockies, North Dakota, Canadian production, all converging on that Cushing marketplace. It's, I would say in the foreseeable future, the near term, I would expect these type of Brent WTI spreads to continue. I don't have a dollar figure or exact timetable for that. So.
Do you think that the shift towards or the small increase towards rail would have been bigger had the Dakota Access Line not gone into service?
If so, a situation where Dakota Access, if theoretically it was not in service today, any incremental production growth would have to be met by crude by rail. And so prior to Dakota Access coming into service, North Dakota was in a scenario of inadequate pipeline takeaway capacity. So any new production growth was having to be met by rail.
Perfect. Any pipeline bottlenecks that you would anticipate or any solutions that have been proposed looking even into the future in 2020?
For which do they specify, gas or crude oil?
Oil pipeline.
On the crude oil side, I'm still anticipating that within the next 12 months, North Dakota oil production will exceed takeaway capacity for crude oil. And so we'll move again from a scenario of adequate pipeline capacity where we sit today, which all the crude by rail movements today are, I would consider, elective. It's not a scenario where those barrels have to use crude by rail. There's marketing reasons that they're doing that. A year from now, if production continues to rise as expected, the industry will move from an elective use of crude by rail to a forced use of crude by rail. And so there are no major new projects. There was an open season that began in March for Dakota Access. There's not been any public information made available at this time, whether or not that was a successful open season or any details surrounding that. So that is one project to keep an eye on. But other than that, you know, that's the billion-dollar question right now that the industry is working through is, you know, what's the next big project out of North Dakota? Is it expanding existing systems? Is it new construction? What's the timing? What's the market, the destination for it? And those are conversations happening at boardrooms around North America.
Wonderful. Any other questions in the room?
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And next is on July 13th, just so you guys know, the next director's cut.
Which was the number that you created? I just want
In the director's cut itself, we had daily, what I had sent out,
Daily gas.
March daily gas.
okay, what's the correct number?
So the number there is 2,119,751 MCF.
2119.
2,119,751.
Okay, thank you.
I forgot to mention that OPEC meets next week, right?
Next Friday. Yep. So
And so
that's another
you know,
variable.
when you think about it, what happens to Brent prices if Saudi Arabia and Russia open the tap? Well, they go down. So then the differential decreases. So yeah. So